Hey, welcome. Today I'm going to show you guys how to change the wheel bearing assembly on this F150. Alright, so this is going to be a step-by-step process on how to change out the wheel bearing hub assembly on a 2011 to 2014 F150. Now, if you're looking for how to diagnose the bearing, if it's noisy or something like that, you're in the wrong spot. Down in the description of the video, you'll find a link that's going to take you to our page that's got that step-by-step procedure. Also, down there in the description, you'll find a link that's going to take you to the installation or replacement page for this bearing. There you'll be able to follow along step by step, and that page is going to include the torque specs, the tools required, even the part required is going to be found through a link on that page. So check that out if you want to follow along as we're going through the video here today. So why are we out in the driveway today? Well, the shop is all full up with big jobs in there. So we're doing it in the driveway, but really guys, this bearing assembly replacement is not a bad driveway job. We're going to get it up on jack stands, pull the wheel off, and get everything done here, and I'll show you why it's not too bad of a job to do. And hopefully we can beat the book time of an hour on this job. So why don't we get right into it? The first step we're going to do is get the lug nuts loose here on the wheel. We don't want to be doing that when it's up in the air. So let's get those loose, get this thing safely up in the air. Let's do it. So with the vehicle safely up in the air on a set of jack stands and the wheel out of the way, we can start in on replacing our wheel bearing assembly. Now when I do this, I'll start usually with the center of the center cap here, pulling this off and unbolting the way the axle shaft comes through the knuckle. So I like to grab a pliers and try not to damage this cap so I don't have to replace it. And I'll grab it and rock it back and forth and hopefully be able to break it loose. There it goes. So just like that, the cap comes off and we haven't wrecked this sealing surface at all here. So we're going to keep all the dirt and crap that's could get in here. We're going to keep that all out of here because we don't want to get anything in here. There's actually a small bearing inside of here. So cap out of the way. We're going to grab a 15mm socket. I'll turn this so you guys can see. 15mm socket on there. And we're going to remove this nut. Now, according to Ford and their service procedure, this nut needs to be replaced. It is a plastic nylon lock nut, so it is a one-time use nut. It's got the blue plastic inside of it right there. So unfortunately, they didn't have one in stock when I bought the bearings, so we have one coming. It'll go on here as soon as we get it, but you guys should change this nut out according to what Ford is saying. So that nut is loose. Now we don't have to worry about hammering this thing out with an air hammer or anything like that like we would on a traditional axle shaft. This is going to come apart really nice. One thing to note here is you see the distance in what this shaft is protruding from the bearing. This needs to be the case when we reinstall this later. If this shaft isn't protruding to this length, we'll have a problem and we could wreck the splines on the back side of the bearing, IWE, and axle assembly, okay? We don't want to crush those as this all gets tightened down. So this depth is critical. I like to just take a finger, hold it against the bearing, and kind of press on it and see it's coming about halfway down my finger, about ½ an inch or so of protrusion from there. That's what I'm going to look for when we put this thing back together later. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and start disassembling the brakes. If the vehicle needs brakes, there's no better time to do it because the rotor has to come off, brakes have to come off. I'm going to disassemble it, the caliper and the bracket as an assembly, but if you needed brakes, now would be the time to disassemble the caliper and the bracket separately and do it that way. But we're going to take an 18mm socket here. Oh, I take that back. We're going to take a 21mm socket and we're going to break these bolts loose for the bracket assembly. All right, so you want to be careful using a short socket for this because as you can see, if I get on this top bolt right here, if I break this thing loose and all of a sudden it frees up, I can smash the bleeder right off of this caliper, causing us to either have to extract the bleeder from the caliper and install a new one or replace the caliper as an assembly. So instead of using a short socket on there to break it loose, I'm going to go back to my long socket and break it loose like this. Then I can switch to the ratchet later when I'm not concerned about breaking that off. All right, so that came loose nice. All right, so with everything unbolted from the knuckle, this assembly is very, very heavy. We don't want to hang it from the rubber brake hose here. We don't want to wreck it. So you can either get yourself these S hooks that you can probably pick up at a parts store, or get yourself some mechanics wire or coat hanger, anything to get this thing up and out of the way where it's not hanging from the brake hose. So I'm going to hook it into the bolt hole here, and then there's a hole up in the top of the control arm. Now we're secure out of the way, putting no weight on that brake hose assembly. So it's not uncommon for the brake rotor itself to be stuck to the hub assembly where it's not coming off nice like this. Now these brakes were done recently. There were some anti-seize applied to the backside here, so the rotor's coming off nice. But if it wasn't, you'd want to take your hammer and tap on these edges here. You don't want to hit on the face of the rotor. You don't want to damage where the pad is contacting the rotor. Otherwise you might end up with problems with the brake rotor. So we'll get this guy out of the way, set off to the side. And now our bearing is ready to be unbolted. There's going to be 4 bolts on the back side that are 18 millimeter. Okay, so with all 4 of the bolts out that are attaching the hub assembly to the knuckle assembly, we're almost ready to pull the hub assembly off of the vehicle. But I want to make a note here, guys. According to the service procedure, according to Ford, these 4 bolts are supposed to be replaced. Now, I don't know if anybody actually replaces them. I don't replace them. I put Loctite on them, and we're going to be putting Loctite on them and reinstalling them here. But if you choose to put the bolts in, great. That's what Ford is telling you to do in this case. Awesome. But we are not in this case. We're going to Loctite them and call it good. So now before we can take this hub assembly off of the knuckle, we need to detach the ABS brake line, because that's going to come with our new hub assembly. So that's going to run from the knuckle all the way to up here in the fender liner. I'm going to actually shift our caliper over to the other side to get it out of the way for this part. All right, we got an 8 millimeter bolt right here, attaching our harness to our knuckle. Now it's not uncommon for this bolt to break here, okay? So be careful when you're taking it out. It is just a tiny little bolt, but this is holding our ABS sensor harness in place properly. If you don't replace this, that ABS harness could rub and cause an issue in the future, an ABS issue. So 8 millimeter bolt out of there. Then we're going to take a trim tool like this, and we're going to start popping the clips. There's one right here, right next to the brake line assembly. There's one up here. And then up in the fender liner here, the connector is actually connected to the body harness. So we're going to have to pull this down, and you're going to see that we have a locking tab, a red locking tab here. This locking tab needs to get pressed up to unlock it, and then we just simply push on the black tab in there, squeeze it in, and unplug the connector. Now just take note that the harness is run on the inside of the brake line right here. We want to make sure we get it back in the exact same spot. We can move our brake caliper back over to the other side now, so it's out of our way. ABS sensor harness disconnected. Now we can start to tap out our bearing. So as we pull this off of here, it should actually remain pretty clean inside of here, and this one doesn't look too bad. All right, so this is important right here. We want to take a look at the gearing of the IWE and the gearing of the axle shaft itself, and make sure that there's no wear or anything on there. You'll see here that these two spline together. Before we start cleaning the rust and stuff off of here, you want to kind of make sure that this doesn't get all messed up inside here. We want to keep as much dirt and stuff out of that IWE assembly as possible. Now, if you had a die grinder or something, I would use that here to clean all this rust off, knock all this down, but we're just going to use a fine grit sanding block here to clean off as much of that rust as possible. All right, we're going to take some wheel bearing grease, and I'm going to apply it right to these splines on the IWE assembly. So with everything cleaned up, we're ready to install the new wheel bearing. Now we're going to do the same thing, is grease the splines, or where that's going to spline up. So I'm just going to get some grease on my finger here, and so you guys can see it. And just apply the grease to where this is going to spline up here, because this is going to be a mechanical connection point for our four-wheel drive system on here. We don't want to have any sort of wear occurring if we can avoid it. So grease this guy up, and I'm also going to put a very thin layer on this O-ring that's right here to prevent any possibility of the O-ring being rolled or anything like that. So we want to make sure that our axle shaft is pulled all the way in, mated up with the IWE, and then make sure when you're installing the bearing that the ABS sensor, ABS harness is bolted in at the top. We'll slide it over the axle shaft end. Very carefully try to get everything to line up the way it should be. Now, if you can hear it, it's one point there, it wasn't aligned properly. This hub and the axle shaft should now be synced together. They should be locked together. If we were to start the vehicle up right now or apply vacuum to the backside of this IWE, this hub should free spin. But I want them locked up right now because I want to make sure that everything is splined and meshed together properly. All right, that feels good. We'll get the bolts started. Now, as we're starting to tighten these bolts down here, I don't want to ram them all on one side tight right away. I want to start to snug it and bring this bearing in nice and straight. So that one is snug, not snug, but it's starting to pull the bearing in a little bit. It's not going to seat perfectly on here, so we want to make sure that the bearing is being pulled in straight. All right, so with all four of the bearing bolts snug, we're going to go ahead and torque them down to 129 foot-pounds. All right, with the wheel bearing assembly bolted down to the knuckle and secure, we can go ahead and install the harness assembly as well as the ABS harness assembly, as well as that little 15mm nut that was on here. Now again, like I told you guys, this nut is supposed to be replaced, and ours will get replaced when we get a new one. Just unfortunately for the video today, we did not have one. Now before we install this nut, we need to be checking the depth or the exposure or how far this threaded shaft is sticking through, okay? This, if we were to tighten this nut down and it's not sticking out, we would end up crushing those splines. Another good thing to check is that as we spin this, we should not hear any sort of clicking or ratcheting sound. That ratcheting sound would be those teeth grinding on each other. We want to hear and see the axle shaft turning in this case, and everything is looking good. So we'll go ahead and get this nut tightened down. All right, so this axle shaft nut will go down to 30 foot-pounds. You might want to brace the assembly from spinning. There we go. And then we'll reapply the dust cap here. If your dust cap got destroyed, replace it. We don't want to get stuff inside of here. Should be a nice snug fit. You should not be able to pull it off by hand, okay? There we go. That's good to go. That's tight. The hub assembly's tight. Now we can install the wheel bearing harness. And then plugging it back into the body side connector. Make sure it clicks. You can't remove it, and then push down and lock the tab back in place. Now I've already got a bunch of anti-seize on the back side of this brake rotor, so I'm not going to bother putting any more on the new hub. But if you'd want to, you could put a thin coat of anti-seize between the two surfaces so they come apart nice next time. I'll take a lug nut also, because this rotor doesn't have anything that holds it in place. I'll spin a lug nut on to hold it while I'm getting the brakes put back together. All right, then these two caliper bracket bolts are going to get torqued down to 184 foot-pounds. All right, so I think everything here is back together. The hub is bolted down, the brakes are bolted down, the axle shaft is bolted back in. I'm gonna put the wheel back on off of camera. It's really not that big of a deal, right? Torque spec on the wheel is gonna be dependent on the F150 and the rims that it's using, so make sure you check your owner's manual for that specific torque spec to torque your lug nuts down to. So if you guys enjoyed what you saw today, awesome, please give us that thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already. Click on that little bell icon, that way you get a notification every time we come out with a new video. If you guys want to follow along to this video or get a step-by-step procedure, again, link down in the description. If you're wondering what tools we used, that's in that link as well. If you want to buy the parts that we used, that's in that link as well. If you follow that link, buy your parts or tools through there, guys, it does help to support our channel as well. So that would be cool. I hope you guys found something useful from this. I hope you enjoyed the process of changing out a wheel bearing hub assembly on an 11 to 14 F150. See? Not too bad of a driveway job on this one. All right, appreciate you guys watching. Thank you so much. And as always, happy wrenching, everyone. Thank you.